Philosophical Hinduism. Hindu philosophy emerges with Classical Hinduism in the 6th century BCE. During this time, the last of the Vedic texts, the Upanishads, are written. Classical Hinduism at times presents itself as a reform or development of Vedic tradition. When we look at the big picture, however, this looks more like a new religious movement that becomes the prevailing religion of a people. Core religious concepts of karma, reincarnation, samsara, dharma, and moksha appear in the Upanishads. In addition, some of the religious practices from this era of Hindu history continue today. How does philosophical Hinduism fit into Hinduism's central narrative? To help situate philosophical Hinduism, it helps to remember the central narrative of Hinduism. Humanity's problem is that we cannot easily escape from the relentless cycle of death and rebirth unto suffering called samsara. Our thoughts, desires, and actions generate karma. Whatever we put into the world will ultimately come back to us. Karma will repay us in the next life, if not in this one. Because we inevitably die with a debt of papa, demerit, or a surplus of punya, merit, we end up being born again. Philosophical Hinduism emerges at the same time Hindu tradition develops this central narrative, and it proposes a path to liberation, or moksha. For philosophical Hinduism, human ignorance causes samsara, and cultivating wisdom about ultimate reality offers a path to liberation. The two other paths or marga of Hinduism are karma marga, which focuses on living in accord with dharma, and bhakti marga, which focuses on devotion to a person's chosen deity. What's the history behind philosophical Hinduism? Philosophical Hinduism emerges with two Hindu religious institutions in the 6th century BCE. First, the Upanishads, and second, the Sannyasin, or renouncers. The Upanishads were drafted between 600 and 300 BCE, and are part of the larger corpus of Vedic literature. Many of the texts present dialogues between students and their teachers, which could help explain the title of these scriptures. Upanishads means sit down near, and it was the practice for students to sit at the feet of their teachers, to learn and study. We find in these texts some of the key concepts of classical Hindu worldview: Brahman, Atman, karma, and reincarnation. The Sannyasin emerge as competing religious authorities to the priests of Vedic religion. The word Sannyasin means renouncer. They are former householders who give up their marriage, property, family life, title, name, and work to live as wandering ascetics. They live barely at the level of subsistence and on the margins of society in an effort to gain greater insight into ultimate reality. They wear ashes as a symbol of the death of their previous lives. They gather food from nature or beg. Do not remain at any one place for a long period of time. Even as they renounce the positions and prestige of their previous lives, they insist nevertheless on accepting the guidance of a guru. In the 6th century BCE, some of the Sannyasin raised critical questions about the Vedic sacrifices and the authority of Vedic priests. The critiques of the Sannyasin, coupled with the emergence of gurus, contributes to the rise of the culture of classical Hinduism. This becomes the predominant approach to Hinduism for several centuries. We see its legacy in the practices of Hindu people today. Most Hindu practitioners today respect the authority of the Upanishads as a sacred text, and many hold to interpretations of the concepts discussed in its verses. A significant majority believe in karma, about 77%. 40% of Hindu people today say they believe in reincarnation. And, interestingly, a larger share, 47%, say they believe in moksha, or liberation from the cycle of rebirth. A small minority of Hindu people today adopt the practice of renouncers. a few million among nearly 1.2 billion people who identify as Hindu. Philosophical Hinduism involves study and meditation. In some ways, it can be like Western education, because students need to learn Sanskrit to study the sacred literature. But a guru primarily teaches students practices of breathing, meditation, fasting, dietary regulation, and posture to facilitate more focused attention and increase a student's ability to ponder matters of ultimate reality. The central teaching of most Hindu schools of philosophy involves the relationship between Atman, soul, and Brahman, the essence of reality itself. The knowledge that liberates is not merely about memorizing definitions or developing a cognitive grasp on how different philosophers articulate their teachings. Philosophical Hinduism seeks personal wisdom based on an experienced realization of that wisdom's significance. A story from the Upanishads of Uddalaka and Svetaketu points toward the kind of knowledge this involves. Uddalaka is a wise man who sends his son Svetaketu to study the Vedas. Though Svetaketu excels in his studies, Uddalaka, as a person, is not easily impressed. He asks his son how to hear what cannot be heard, perceive what cannot be perceived, and know what cannot be known. Svetaketu's education had not prepared him to address these questions. So in the evening, Uddalaka gives his son a handful of salt and asks him to put it in a container of water. The next morning, he asks Svetaketu to bring him the salt. But Svetaketu says it's not possible. The salt has dissolved in the water. Uddalaka then asks Svetaketu to taste the water and asks him, how is it? Svetaketu says it's salty. Uddalaka then says, here likewise in this body of yours, my son, you do not perceive the true, but there, in fact, it is. And that which is the subtle essence, all that exists has itself. That is the true, that is the self, and thou, Svetaketu, art that. This well-known story talks about the relationship between a self, Atman, and reality, Brahman. But even as it points toward an answer, it leaves a lot of questions unanswered. Different schools of Hindu philosophy address the relationship between Atman and Brahman in different ways. When we look at the rise of classical Hinduism in the 6th century, we see some reinterpretations of Vedic religion and important innovations in religious practice. The aim of religion shifts from bringing divine order to chaos to seeking liberation or moksha. Vedic religion focuses on fire sacrifice. Classical Hinduism presents itself as a reinterpretation of this practice and calls meditation a kind of inner fire that generates warmth, a symbol of divine favor. Vedic religion had a priestly class on whom people depended for religious participation. But in classical Hinduism, meditation and its religious benefits depend on the actions of individual practitioners themselves. Religious ascetics and their gurus become the new religious elites, replacing the Vedic priesthood. Classical Hinduism has 2 tracks. Only a small number of upper caste male householders have the time or resources it takes to study Vedic literature and develop the skills of meditation needed to achieve moksha. For everyone else, the religious aim becomes the pursuit of a favorable reincarnation by striving for kama, artha, and dharma as guided by Hindu scriptures. We see an attempt to merge these 2 tracks with a teaching about the stages of life, which posits a time in the life cycle after a person's children had become parents themselves, when an upper caste person would move from being a householder to living as a forest dweller, who withdraws from the duties of family and economic life to pursue wisdom. But this teaching does not appear to have been adopted widely among Hindu practitioners. What are the schools of Hindu philosophy? There are 6 darshanas, the classical schools of Hindu philosophy. a Hindu philosophy accepts the authority of Vedic scriptures. We will look briefly at three of them. Sankhya philosophy advances a dualistic vision. Reality is composed of matter and of souls. Souls become trapped in matter in the course of the world's creation. People experience this because they can recognize how thoroughly their attention and their reflection focuses on what their senses allow them to perceive. The goal of this philosophy is to liberate one's soul from matter. Yoga, not the westernized practice of yoga as fitness, but the philosophical school of yoga, emerges from the Sankhya school. It proposes a set of exercises, breathing, posture, movement, and meditation, that seeks first to help a person withdraw from conscious awareness of the sensory world, to learn to sharpen the focus of their meditation, and then finally to merge their consciousness into the subject of their meditation so completely that they no longer have awareness of their own subjectivity. Vedanta, which also emerges from the Sankhya school, denies the dualism between matter and soul and holds instead that everything which is real is Brahman. The greatest scholar of the Vedanta school is Shankara, who taught in the 8th century of the Common Era. Vedanta teaches that what people perceive as multiplicity in the world is in fact an illusion. Reality can be discovered within, through study and meditation. The core teaching of Vedanta: Brahman alone is true reality. The world is an appearance, and each individual person, who is an aware and self-directing being, each person is that absolute reality. There is a unity between Atman, or what we call in the West a soul, and Brahman, true reality. Within Vedanta, we find a range of views on how to make sense of human experiences of variation, and how to make sense of experiences of divinity. In the United States, Vedanta is the oldest form of Hinduism to give rise to religious congregations. Swami Vivekananda founds the Vedanta Society in 1894. It has associations in a number of cities in the U.S., including New York and San Francisco. Learning about Vivekananda's background gives us a sense of the Hindu practice we can find in the Vedanta Society. Vivekananda was a member of the Brahmo Samaj, the Society of God. This Hindu group says that the Vedas have human authors, not divine authorship. They promote a rational, pro-democratic, and philosophical interpretation of Hindu religion. They also honor all religions as different paths united in a quest for God. Vivekananda also is influenced by Ramakrishna. Ramakrishna was a mystic who experienced visions. He also advocated for the unity of religions, but bases his position on his own experience of faith and not the rationalism of the Brahmo Samaj. In his lifetime, Ramakrishna practices Christianity and Islam, and all the while experiences these practices to authentically express his beliefs as a Hindu person. In the Vedanta Society, we find a philosophical practice of Hinduism. Its teachers offer non-dualist explanations of our world and human experience, and its members tend toward tolerance of other religions, often seeing them as sharing in an overarching search for God.